Sarah Connor grew up hearing stories about mermaids from her sailor father. He told her about strange creatures in the ocean. He said they sang songs and lured sailors into the sea. Sarah never believed him. She thought they were just stories. But 3 months ago, after her father passed away, she received something unexpected: a diary. The diary had 300 pages. Each page was filled with notes about mermaids. Some pages described sightings, while others had strange symbols and warnings. Sarah read through them carefully. In the middle of the diary, she found something even more interesting: a map. It showed an unknown island in the Pacific Ocean. The island was not on any official maps. Sarah felt an urge to go there. Her father had spent his life searching for mermaids. Now she wanted to find the truth. She packed her equipment, checked her camera, and made sure she had enough food and water. Then she took her father's ship and set sail. Her only companion was her dog, a loyal black Labrador. The journey was not easy. The ocean was rough, and storms made it worse. Some nights, strong winds rocked the ship. Rain poured down, and lightning flashed across the sky. Sarah barely slept. She had to stay alert. She checked the map often, making sure she was on the right course. Even when the waves crashed against the boat, she didn't turn back. Days turned into weeks. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. She had never felt so alone. Her dog stayed by her side, always watching. Sometimes he would bark at the water, but Sarah never saw anything unusual. She hoped she wasn't chasing something that didn't exist. After 39 days, she finally saw land. A small island appeared in the distance. It was covered in thick trees and surrounded by mist. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and fear. She had made it, but she had no idea what she would find. She carefully anchored the ship near the shore. The waves crashed against the rocks. The island looked untouched, as if no human had ever set foot there. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. She grabbed her backpack, checked her camera, and stepped onto the shore. Her dog followed, sniffing the ground. The air smelled fresh, mixed with salt from the ocean. The island was quiet. There were no signs of people, no boats, and no footprints in the sand. Thick trees stood tall, their branches reaching toward the sky. It felt like a place lost in time. Sarah tightened her grip on her backpack. She had come too far to stop now. Without resting, she walked toward the dense forest, her dog by her side. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and fallen leaves. She pushed forward, determined to find what had brought her here. The answers she was looking for were somewhere on this island. She just had to keep going. Sarah didn't stop to rest. She had come too far to turn back now. The island was silent. There were no birds, no insects, no signs of life. Only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The trees were thick and tall, blocking most of the sunlight. The deeper she walked, the darker it became. Her dog stayed close, his ears twitching at every small noise. He seemed nervous. Sarah felt it too. Something about the island didn't feel right. The air was heavy, almost like it was holding a secret. She kept moving forward, pushing through thick vines and uneven ground. Then she saw it. In the middle of the jungle stood a tall metal fence. It was rusted and covered in moss. At the top, sharp wires curled like thorns. Behind the fence, hidden beneath overgrown vines, was a large building. It was old and falling apart. The windows were broken and the walls were cracked. It looked like an abandoned research station. Sarah's heart pounded. What was this place doing here? Why wasn't it on any map? She felt uneasy, but curiosity was stronger. She had to see what was inside. She climbed over the fence, careful not to cut herself on the metal wires. As she landed on the other side, her dog barked. It was loud and sharp. He pulled at his leash, trying to drag her away. His body was tense, his tail stiff. Sarah frowned. He had never acted like this before. But she shook off the feeling. She couldn't let fear stop her now. She tied his leash to the fence, making sure he couldn't follow. Then she turned toward the building. The door was slightly open. It creaked as she pushed it wider. A wave of dust filled the air. The smell inside was strange, stale and damp, like something had been left there for years. She stepped inside, her boots making the old floorboards creak. The hallway was dark. The walls were cracked and paint peeled away in large flakes. Everything was covered in dust. She turned on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing broken furniture and scattered papers. It looked like people had left in a hurry. Then she saw something that made her stomach tighten. Red words were smeared on the wall, written in uneven letters. Some of the paint had dripped down like blood. The message was simple, but it made her chest tighten. Escape before the siren's song. Sarah stared at the words. Her hands felt cold. Who had written this, and why? Her mind raced with questions, but before she could think, a sound filled the air. It was soft at first, like a whisper. Then it grew louder. A melody. It was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. Sarah's breath caught. Her flashlight flickered. The floor beneath her seemed to shift. She was not alone. Sarah's breathing became unsteady. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside her head. Her vision blurred. The walls seemed to move, swaying like waves. She felt dizzy. Her legs grew heavy, and she struggled to stay on her feet. Her flashlight flickered. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to move. She had to get out. But something was wrong. Her feet wouldn't take her toward the door. Instead, she was walking deeper into the building. She didn't understand why. It was as if something was pulling her forward. Then she saw a staircase. Had it been there before? She didn't think so. But before she could question it, she found herself stepping down. The melody wrapped around her like invisible hands. It wasn't just a sound. It was something alive. It wanted her to follow. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway opened into a large room. The air was colder here. Sarah shivered. The walls were cracked and the floor was damp. But her eyes were drawn to one thing, a massive window covering the far wall. Beyond the glass was the ocean. The water was dark and endless. It felt too close, as if the sea itself was part of the room. Sarah's hands trembled as she stepped closer. Then something moved. A shadow drifted through the water. It was slow at first, then sudden. It was not a fish. It was not a person. It was something else. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't look away. The figure came closer, pressing against the glass. The water around it seemed to glow. Her flashlight flickered again, barely holding on to its light. Then, she saw it clearly. A face stared back at her. Pale skin, dark eyes, long hair floating in the water. It was a mermaid, but it was nothing like the ones in her father's stories. Its eyes locked onto hers. It tilted its head, watching her. Sarah's hands shook. She reached for her phone. She needed to record this. No one would believe her without proof. She pressed the record button. The mermaid lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass. Its mouth opened. Sarah braced herself for the song, but no sound came. Instead, the water behind it darkened. Something was wrong. Sarah stood frozen. The creature in the water was unlike anything she had ever seen. It had pale skin that seemed to glow, dark, empty eyes, and long hair that floated around its face. It wasn't human, but it wasn't just a fish either. It was something else. Her breath came in short gasps. She needed proof. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone. She pressed record. The camera's red light blinked, capturing the eerie figure behind the glass. The mermaid tilted its head, watching her. Then, its lips parted. Sarah tensed, expecting another song, another wave of dizziness. But no sound came. The silence was worse. The water around the creature turned dark. Shadows swirled like ink spreading through the ocean. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to run. Something was wrong. The mermaid wasn't just watching her, it was waiting. Her chest tightened. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. The melody was still in her head, wrapping around her thoughts like invisible chains. Then a sharp bark cut through the air. Her dog. The sound jolted her awake. The spell over her broke, if only for a second. She turned and bolted. Her feet hit the floor hard. Her phone was still in her hand, the screen shaking as she recorded everything. She ran toward the stairs, but something was wrong. The hallway had changed. The walls stretched, twisting like a maze. The path back was no longer there. She stopped, chest heaving. She turned left, then right. Every corridor looked the same. Panic crawled up her spine. The melody grew louder. She turned in circles, searching for an exit. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. The mermaid's reflection was everywhere. It wasn't just behind the glass anymore. It was on the walls, the floor, the ceiling. No matter where she looked, its glowing eyes followed her. Sarah's heartbeat pounded in her ears. The reflections moved, shifting like ripples on water. It wasn't a trick, it was real. She gripped her phone tighter. "No," she whispered, barely able to breathe. Then the lights flickered. The melody became deafening. Sarah staggered backward. The reflections moved toward her, closing in. She could feel their eyes on her, pressing against her skin. She ran. She didn't know which way to go, but she didn't stop. Her boots slammed against the floor, echoing through the empty halls. She turned a corner. A door. Hope surged in her chest. She lunged for it, yanking the handle. It didn't budge. She pounded against it. "Let me out!" Behind her, the reflections gathered, their shapes merging into one. Sarah turned, tears burning her eyes. The last thing her phone recorded was her own terrified face. The screen flickered. Then it went black. Sarah's phone was still recording. The screen captured everything. Her heavy breathing, the dim light from her flashlight, the way the walls seemed to shift. But the loudest thing was the melody. It drowned out her footsteps. It filled every corner of the room. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't listen. Her body felt frozen. Her fingers gripped her phone tightly, but she couldn't look away from the screen. The reflections of the mermaid were everywhere. The glass, the walls, even on the floor beneath her feet. Then, static. The video cut out for a moment. When it flickered back on, Sarah was gone. Her ship remained anchored near the island, untouched. Days passed, then weeks. No one saw her again. Her dog was found later. He was still tied to the fence, barking into the empty jungle. His leash was worn, almost broken from pulling, but he had never left. He had stayed, waiting for Sarah to return. The diary was gone. The map had disappeared. Her phone was never recovered, but the video remained. No one knew how it appeared online. Some said it uploaded itself. Others believed someone, something, had sent it. It showed up on social media, shared by users who swore they had never clicked anything. No one could trace its source. The last frame of the video was the most chilling. Sarah's face, frozen in fear. Her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted as if she had been about to scream. Then the screen turned black. The people who watched the video started noticing strange things. Some heard whispers at night, voices too soft to understand. Others saw shadows moving where there was no light. They felt something watching them, something unseen. Some claimed they could hear the song, even when their speakers were off. It didn't stop. No matter how many times they turned off their devices, no matter how far they tried to run. The song followed. The video still exists, and now it sits on your screen. The play button is waiting, and the mermaid is still searching.